Since 1966,
the well-being of those animals is not at risk.
Ridglan Farms has bred beagles for life as lab rats.
There's nothing I can do to stop animal testing.
But it's what happened beyond the barbed wire.
Was anesthesia ever used in these procedures? No.
Do you believe they suffered?
Yes.
That will soon quiet the barks.
They have agreed to basically fold up the business
of Wisconsin's largest puppy mill.
This decision today is a huge step in the right direction.
This week on Open Record, what happened behind the scenes.
It's one thing to make your voice known. It's another thing to harass, intimidate, and threaten people.
And what's next as Ridglan Farms approaches the end of the line.
We're not done. This isn't over.
From the Fox 6 studios, this is Open Record. I'm Brian Polson, and I'm joined, as always, by Open Record's executive producer, Sarah Smith. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
And we welcome back to the podcast Contact 6's Jenna Sachs. Hi, Jenna.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We are recording this episode on Thursday, October 30th. Earlier this week, a special prosecutor appointed to investigate animal cruelty inside a commercial beagle breeding operation agreed not to file criminal charges. In exchange, Ridglan Farms has agreed to wind down its breeding business and surrender its state breeding license by July 1st of 2026, if not sooner. We've been telling you for months about the controversy surrounding this nearly 60-year-old beagle breeding operation in western Dane County, that's in central part of Wisconsin. This is the decision that observers across the country have been waiting on all year. We're going to talk to the animal rights group whose legal filing prompted the investigation in the first place, and we will hear from the La Crosse County District Attorney who volunteered to step into what I can best describe as a hornet's nest, accepting the role of special prosecutor in his highly watched case. We'll talk about all of that and much more right after this.
We are back on Open Record. We've talked a lot about Ridglan Farms here on this podcast in 2025, probably the most frequently of
right.
But the one thing people have been waiting to hear is, will the special prosecutor do something? Will there be some charges, criminal charges, animal cruelty? So now we know what's going to happen.
We do. And you're right when you say that there's been a lot going on with this. We've talked about it so much. We've talked about animal research. What's the future of research for pharmaceuticals? What does the technology show? There are veterinary board investigations, and there's
it's not just it's not just the same topic over and over. There's always a development. There's always something different.
But hanging over all of that has been the question of, okay, back in January, a Dane County judge appointed a special prosecutor to look into whether or not animal cruelty had occurred, criminal animal cruelty at Ridglan Farms. And that's really what everyone's been waiting for. And all I think of the stories that we've done have kind of led up to is there going to be a decision? We kept hearing more and more, when's something going to happen? Well, it finally happened this week. And Ridglan Farms will not be charged with any crimes. However, that's because they cut a deal. They agreed to a settlement, a stipulation that says there will be no criminal charges filed as long as they surrender their state breeding license, which means by this summer, or by this, not this time, I should say, by July 1st of next summer, there will be no more breeding license for Ridglan Farms. They cannot breed dogs for sale. They cannot sell dogs to other scientific laboratories. It does not mean they have to close their business altogether. And I've seen a lot of headlines that say Ridglan Farms is closing. Maybe, maybe not. They have said in their statements that they're not closing, that they plan to continue going forward and continuing the research that they do. And they do have a federal license to continue that research. So whatever they do in-house, that can continue. What they can't do once this license is surrendered is they cannot continue to breed animals and sell them, transport them other places to be used in research elsewhere.
Are people involved in this story satisfied with that? The people who came to you with this issue in the first place?
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting because it also depends who you ask. There are certainly, we're going to talk to the president of Dane for Dogs, and it was their petition, their legal petition jointly with others in the animal rights industry that led to the hearing last October, which we can talk a little bit about. And it was the testimony at that hearing which prompted the judge to issue this call for a special prosecutor. And we'll talk about why special prosecutor, why not the Dane County DA himself, Ismail Ozan? Why did they have to go outside of Dane County for this? That's a whole other wrinkle in all this. But when you talk about all the groups that are observing this, they're a wide variety. If you think one thing I've learned more than anything through this process, if you think sort of the animal rights community is this homogenous, that we're all on the same page, not anywhere close. There are people with varying opinions of what they think justice would be or what should happen, how you should go about doing it, how they approach public officials that are involved here. And some are certainly much more zealous about their opinions than others. Sometimes they're in competition with one another for the spotlight. I've had a lot of people over the past 8 months who've reached out to me and they want a little slice of the spotlight. They want their name out there, their organization's name out there. We've got an expert for you. And they come into this right as it's starting to ramp up. And all of a sudden they're going, I want to capitalize on this. Let's get our name in front of Brian Polson, because we know Fox 6 has been getting a lot of attention nationally. Yeah. When we do these stories, it gets spread far and wide. So it's really, so your ultimate question was, are they satisfied? And I think it depends who you ask. There are some who say this is absolutely not enough because the dogs are still there. And the dogs will be sold to customers who are going to do experiments on them, the dogs that are remaining between now and at least July 1st of next year. And so some say, well, wait a minute, what about the dogs that are still there? So they're going to get this, what they consider a death sentence. This isn't enough. On the other hand, you have the others saying, this is a business that's been around for 60 years. It's only recently started getting this much public attention. And within a relatively short amount of time, they've agreed to stop breeding dogs. So I think it really depends who you ask. Is this a victory? Is this not enough? Is this as good as they could have done? And I'll bring it back to one other thing, and we're going to talk to the special prosecutor himself about this. If you really ask many people who are observing this, what's on trial here? A lot of them would say, to them, it's animal testing. Should we be testing on dogs? Should we be testing on animals at all to develop products for other animals or develop products for humans, to develop pharmaceuticals? That's not what the special prosecutor was tasked with deciding, because that's legal. He had to look at, were they doing things that were criminal, a very different standard. So I also think some of the dissatisfaction that you hear from some of these groups with the deal that was cut is they wanted nothing short of animal testing to end altogether. Well, that wasn't really ever going to happen here. The idea that this facility is saying we're going to shut down our breeding operation come, sometime early next year, I think for many, and we'll talk to Rebecca about this with Dane for Dogs, I think that's seen as a pretty significant victory for those who oppose animal testing.
What are some of the things you were talking about? Did they do anything criminal? What kind of things, let's remind people, were people questioning?
Well, and we're going to get some of the details from what the special prosecutor saw that was, he thought had stronger evidence than others. When I mentioned there was a hearing last fall. There were former employees that came forward and testified in a public court hearing in Dane County. And probably the most egregious thing, or the hardest thing to listen to, that they testified to is they had been employees at Ridglan Farms. They're not veterinarians, but they were given the task of participating in very painful and bloody surgeries where they were, I know this might be hard to listen to, but they were taking, beagles tend to develop a problem with their eye glands where it's swollen. And whether it was for cosmetic reasons or some other reason, they were having those so-called cherry eyes removed, where they would have one person hold the animal in place because, of course, they're going to thrash in pain, and another employee would snip with scissors that thing. And they described that it was a very bloody process, that there was no pain relief that was given after, and there was no general anesthesia. There's some question about whether there was even local anesthesia or topical anesthesia given beforehand. So no pain relief for these dogs. And these employees described the guilt they felt at having been a part of that. I think that was probably the most powerful evidence. There was also discussion of, we've talked here about 4,000 dogs in this facility. We've seen some of the video of 2 or 3, 4 of these in a cage. How many employees do they have? I think at the time that the video was first shot back in 2017, maybe 16 employees, 4,000 dogs. How much attention can they get in a day? Yeah. There are requirements in the law that animals at a breeding facility get a certain amount of human interaction or a certain amount of socialization. And what were they getting? I know some people have done the math and said, and it couldn't have been more than a minute a day for each dog, if even that. But then you get into the questions of what are the legal standards? And we'll talk to the special prosecutor about that. How much does a dog in a breeding facility need to get, or in a, maybe if you're raising dogs to sell as pets versus dogs being raised to sell for research. So there's some differences there. And then there were questions about conditions. Were the dogs suffering injuries? Was it sanitary? That seemed to be the weakest evidence overall in terms of what the special prosecutor saw and what he reviewed. And that didn't seem to rise to the level of crimes. In the end, it was the cherry eye surgeries. And we know they did hundreds of them. I think more than 300 led to citations or violations that DATCAP found, Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection. And those are really the basis, I think, for most of what we've seen here.
When it comes to this facility's licensing, were there people within the building who had licensing, such as veterinarians, and does this affect them at all?
There are a few veterinarians, but the lead veterinarian, Dr. Richard Van Domelen, who is the facility's operations manager, he's in charge of the thing. He's really faced, I think, probably the most scrutiny because he is the one ultimately who was in charge. Yeah. He delegated the surgeries. Mm-hmm. He's the one who said, you do these surgeries, you do these surgeries. Sort of under my supervision, but he wasn't there to witness these things. And the question really became here, did he have the authority to delegate these? He and Ridglan Farms have argued he did, because as a research facility, that sort of delegation of what they considered minor procedures is allowed. As a breeding facility, not allowed. So there was some question here as were they acting as a breeder or a research facility at the time? In the end, ultimately, the veterinary examining board determined that between those surgeries being delegated and the record keeping that they found was not up to standard, they suspended his license. So he is currently suspended pending continued investigation and is facing actually a hearing next Wednesday, November 5th, where he will try to defend his license.
You have mentioned, and we've just been talking about it, special prosecutor. It's not the Dane County DA.
Yeah.
So can you explain why the special prosecutor?
And I want to do it quickly because I see our time.
Yeah.
And this gets away from me, but this is an important question. I'm glad you asked it because if you go back to 2017, there were activists who got inside the facility without permission. Some would say, I know Ridglan Farms would say they trespassed, they broke in. They didn't really break locks or anything, but they got into the facility in the middle of the night and they took a bunch of video and then took 3 of the animals. They were ultimately charged by the Dane County DA several years later with crimes for stealing these animals and for trespassing. But on sort of the 11th hour before their trial, Ridglan Farms dropped the case and asked the DA to dismiss the charges. They apparently just saw what was coming in terms of publicity and said, this is more trouble than it's worth. Let's just make it all go away. Well, when they dropped the case, really the activists turned the tables and they said, we want our day in court. They wanted to be in court, even though they were the defendants. They wanted to be in court. And so multiple activist groups got together and actually turned it around and filed this petition, but they couldn't get the Dane County DA on board to file charges against Ridglan. So they finally said, well, we're going to circumvent the DA and we're going to go straight to the judge. And Wisconsin is one of few states that allows this process where you can petition a judge directly to seek a special prosecutor. And ultimately the judge, after hearing the testimony, found there was probable cause that crimes had been committed. She appointed La Crosse County DA Tim Grinke. And I think that's actually a good time for us to take a break and hear from the special prosecutor himself. I do want to be clear, by the way, we invited Ridglan Farms, its spokesman, its attorneys, anyone who wanted to represent their point of view to appear here on Open Record. We have asked them repeatedly over the last 8 months. They did not respond to this request. But the special prosecutor who made that deal with them also wrote an 8-page report explaining why he did what he did. Now he's going to be here on Open Record to tell us in his own words. We'll come back and talk to him right after this. And welcome back to Open Record. We now welcome a man whose name we've said a lot in 2025, but it's our first chance to talk to him on the podcast. La Crosse County District Attorney Tim Grinke. Tim, welcome to Open Record.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to go back to earlier this year when the Dane County judge decides that she's going to appoint a special prosecutor. There's probable cause of crimes having been committed, and then she's got to go. I don't know how that process works. Did you volunteer to take this case? Did she come to you and say, I think you'd be good? How did that work?
Judge Lanford actually sent a letter out to all the district attorneys in the state asking for a special prosecutor and indicating that if a DA didn't step up, she'd have to appoint a private attorney. So I communicated with other DAs in the state to see if anybody would step up, preferably somebody closer to Dane County. People had various reasons for not doing it, workloads or just not having the time or the experience. to take the case. So I indicated that I would take the case because somebody had to do it, and the Attorney General's office and other DAs either weren't able to or weren't willing to. So I contacted the WDAA president and said, if she's looking for somebody, I would take the case.
So, early on, I know beagle lovers, animal rights activists, they were saying to me, the guy's got a picture of a beagle on his wall. I think he's, he might be one of us. He's an ally. But then as the case went on, many of them changed that opinion and turned on you. Can you talk a little bit about what the last 10 months has been like with the hot spotlight of especially some of the animal rights groups really putting pressure on you to make a decision?
Well, I think you described it accurately before, that it depends on who you ask. There wasn't really a victim in the case for me to contact, but because Dane for Dogs brought the petition, partly because the Dane County District Attorney didn't, I thought I owed them at least an explanation of what was happening and kept them informed of the process. I didn't tell them everything, but I just tried to keep them apprised of topics. And most of the groups that I dealt with were helpful, pointing me to experts in the area, materials to read, prior cases to look at. But then there were some that I think, as you described it, had different views. And unfortunately, with any kind of a movement, there's some people that have well-meaning goals and are very honest and a pleasure to work with, and others just use it for their own purposes. Some people, I think, just get into a movement and they've got other problems in their life. So it was a mix. Some were fine, some were confused about what the issues were, asking me to do things I couldn't do. Some has been even approaching the point of harassing or threatening. It really didn't do a lot to me. I'm used to that. I'm used to working in the spotlight. I tried to listen to anybody that had anything credible to give me and be respectful. But other than that, I didn't really feel pressured by them as much as I just felt I needed to make sure everything was covered, and I answered the questions that people had if they had legitimate questions.
Can we talk a little bit about some of that? So, as Brian mentioned earlier in the podcast here, some people were like, oh, this is the litmus test and the thing for animal testing, which is legal. So what kind of were you tasked with doing and investigating? And then, was there anything that you were like, okay, that's off limits, I can't even consider that when I'm trying to come with my decision?
Absolutely. I was assigned by a judge through a process that you described before. It's a little bit unique. And I took my task to be reporting to the judge and working for in this case, the judge who assigned me a certain task. So there are certain things that she found had merit that I should look at. And as you've seen with some special prosecutors around the country or at the federal level, there's always controversy that the investigation expands into other areas. So I tried to stay on task and focus on what I had jurisdiction of, which was the portion of the business that dealt with the breeding and the selling of beagles. From the beginning, I think that the research part was off limits to me. So I didn't look at that. I didn't really have any jurisdiction into that. And many people were, I think, confused and thought that I should put an end to animal testing or shut them down because animals shouldn't be tested on. And that's a topic that's just beyond my professional capability, and also personally, I don't know how I feel about that. It's not my area of expertise. So I didn't dive into animal testing. There were other issues that people contacted me about that I just thought I shouldn't just take on any complaint about a business. I should focus on what the judge found and stick to that.
Tim, I want to know, I want to understand one thing is when we talked for broadcast on Wednesday, it was on Wednesday. I had asked you about the cherry eye surgeries and the testimony over that. And I said, do you believe the dogs that were involved in those surgeries, do you believe they suffered? And you said yes. And that was the strongest evidence you found for criminal charges. You felt criminal charges were warranted, correct?
Yes, I should mention at the top that they remain innocent until proven guilty. So nothing should be construed as guilt. I'm just saying that I felt I had enough to charge a crime in this case, but that doesn't mean guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But yes, I think the cherry eye procedure could be charged.
The reason I ask about that is I know some have said, well, if these were dogs that were suffering, if these dogs were in pain, and if this was in fact, if you believe, criminal abuse, many of them said, well, then you should go in and seize these dogs. And so tell me why that wasn't something you felt you could do.
So a lot of the cases where you see animals being seized and we've done that before in La Crosse, when a farm is so decrepit and animals are not cared for, they need to be saved to get medical care, to get out of the abusive environment. In this case, most of the allegations that the judge assigned me to, I didn't think had enough proof. So in other words, there wasn't an ongoing situation where animals were being tortured, being abused, that we needed to save the animals today. The GRA procedure that was done was painful to the dogs, but after that's done, they don't need to be seized for evidence. Many of the dogs that had the procedure are long gone, and we're going backwards in time looking at records to decide when it occurred, but many of the dogs are gone. So there really wouldn't be a reason to go in there and save these dogs who do not have a GRA procedure, and even the ones who did weren't being abused in other ways that we needed to get in and save them or shut them down. So I don't see the legal avenue for me to shut down a farm that's otherwise functioning because some of the animals had a procedure that has some controversy to it. We can talk about that later. It's only recent that this was determined to be a violation. So
if I could just ask one follow-up, just one follow-up to that, because I'm asking it sort of on behalf of, I know people who've asked this in my ear. They say, well, if you believed there was evidence to charge them with crimes of having abused those dogs, then if that facility has been known to, in your view, committed some sort of animal cruelty, how can they be trusted with any other dogs? How do you know that they're not a danger to these other dogs?
So a number of reasons, kind of getting to why I didn't charge some of the other charges. Ridglan Farms didn't hide the fact that they were doing these surgeries. They've been doing it since the 60s. Many investigators were in there from the USDA, from DADCAP. There's been veterinarians that have been in that facility. There are other organizations that accredit the agency. And there's no credible evidence that the facility itself, the structure of it, the employment of people, the housing of the dogs is creating an environment where the dogs are being treated cruelly. So we're talking about a procedure that's being done on some of the dogs over time that has been done for a long time. So can we trust them? Well, as much as you can trust anybody. I mean, could they be abusing dogs today? Of course, but you could say that about any farm, any business. So they still have DADCAP being able to go in and the vet board supervision. So at some point, you just have to trust. If you don't have any evidence of something going wrong, you can't just assume it is or think it might be and act on that. You need to have some evidence to say it is happening right now.
You know, Tim, in Brian's story, he talked about cages, small cages, lack of human contact. Those are things I think pet owners don't like to see. But again, animal testing is legal. Is there a path to charges for any of that, or are those just ethical questions? What about those kinds of issues?
There are definitely ethical questions, which again is beyond me. If no one who owns a pet would want their dog to be housed there, including me. But the same could be said for people who own chickens and pigs and goats as pets. If you look at those farms, you also wouldn't want your pets treated that way. So there is a different standard in how we treat pets and how we house them and how we socialize them versus how animals on farms are treated. And they do have regulations to follow. And that's why I did not have any credible evidence that the cages were too small. In fact, they are the appropriate size according to the USDA and DADCAP. I didn't have any evidence that the animals were being housed in some inhumane way. And so that we just didn't have any evidence of that. I understand, though, some people would say that just the very fact that they're is inhumane, but it is legal, and I can't just put my personal views into shutting something down I don't like. I need some evidence and some law to back it up.
Tim, I think about the agreement that actually came out was only 2 pages. It's pretty short. And there's not a lot of detail in there. It essentially says they're going to surrender their license by July 1st of 2026, and in the meantime, they can continue to sell the animals that they have to, fulfill existing orders, that sort of thing. But without the detail, there's some question. I know that you have said, and others have said, that this is an end to their breeding operation. They're closing down, they're winding down, that sort of thing. But their press release certainly sounds different. Their press release sent out the same day says, we're going to keep going strong. This business has been around 60 years and we have no plans of going away. We're going to keep doing things to help, with research that benefits animals and humans. I guess my question is there any chance that they're going to find some loophole out of this very simple agreement and say, we're going to still breed them, but we're going to do them this way? Or is this for certain? Do you feel confident that this will be the end of sort of the Ridglan Farms as we know it?
Well, I feel confident that it will be, but I also recognize in any agreement you make with anybody, there's always a chance that they could back out of it. They could find a loophole. They could try to get around it. I can only say at some point you have to make that decision. I trust the attorneys that I was dealing with that this is what they meant. I trust that they will stand by the agreement. If they don't, these charges still exist and can be brought. But in my communications with them, I feel confident that they're not going to do that. But in this world, you can only trust people so far. And of course, they could be lying to me and they could be trying to get around it. But it's I can't operate in a world where I don't trust anybody and think everybody's lying to me and therefore no agreements can be made. At some point, you have to say, this is what we're going to do and this is the agreement we have, and we're going to trust that they're going to stay true to their word.
If I understand,
they have been clear that they're going to continue their research facility, so that is true. And that was beyond my jurisdiction from the beginning.
So that was going to be my question: is can they, under this agreement, continue to breed animals for their own use? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes. Again, the research part of this business was always beyond my control, and there's nothing to stop us from them breeding for their own purposes. The only reason we're involved at all is because of the selling part of their business, and that's the part that allowed the state to intervene and have some access to the dogs. Under the federal statutes, the research part is not punishable by state statute.
I was going to ask, did Ridglan speak with you? Did they cooperate with this investigation? I know Brian reached out to them to invite them to speak with us a number of times. What about your interaction with them?
They cooperated with me and with the investigation. I spoke through their attorneys, which is pretty normal. And I did not have any problem getting any information I needed, unless it was something more complicated or sometimes it took time. I know that people were asking me as this was going on, what's happening. And as you said in the beginning, things kind of kept coming up and making this stretch out longer. But part of the reason for that is they were giving me information. I was asking questions and asking for their defense or their legal justification. They were providing that. And so I had good communications with them throughout this. And that was part of the reason why I did it this way instead of just charging it and then trying to negotiate something. I think that would have taken longer than this process.
I talked about the agreement was only 2 pages, but you wrote an 8-page report, 4 times longer, explaining your investigation, detailing the steps, and why you decided to do what you did. Tell me about why you wrote that report.
Well, part of it was to give to the judge that appointed me to explain where this was at and what I found, because I felt that even though it's not necessary, it would be helpful. Part of it was for people like you and people that are interested. I can't talk to everybody, and I'm not the type to hold press conferences and need to put myself out there. But for anyone who's interested, reading that helps explain a lot of the questions that I think people would have. I tried to anticipate some of these questions. So hopefully that helps shed some light on what I found, the limits of what I could do, and the reasons and the justifications for what I did, so that it would be as transparent as I can be about the process and about what I did.
Last question I want to ask you, and I know we talked about this on the air before, but I want you to be able to say it here. Ultimately, you decided, because you said you felt you could charge crimes here, but you ultimately decided that what Ridglan was offering was maybe a better deal overall. I think you used the term, you said you stepped back at one point and you said, kind of, what's really the goal here? What did you determine was the goal here?
My goal was to do whatever I could under the law. And if that meant charging them, that meant charging them. And if it meant being able to have a process where we could get more control over this business, then we could do that. I had to consider, do I charge individuals or charge a corporation? In the end, I decided all I could do is charge them. If their license is affected, that's under someone else's control. If they stop the business, that's really under someone else's control. All I could do is charge them with a crime. And if I charge a corporation, that means imposing a fine. Also, if I charge them, I know that they would have fought it. It would take much longer. And so when the offer was made to shut down the business, I thought, well, that's probably more than I can do with a criminal case. So that seems like the best outcome, that if I did nothing, they'd still be doing this for years or decades. If I charged it, it probably would drag on for years. But with this agreement, hopefully within months, they'll be out of business. And I felt like that was a pretty good outcome for what most of the people wanted that I communicated with. And I know while it's not perfect for everybody, I think it's better than what I could have hoped for when I started this case, if all I did was charge them and give them a fine.
Well, I will say this, Tim, and it's not often we get this kind of insight into the whole thought process, and we really appreciate your transparency and your willingness to come here on the podcast. Thank you for being with us here on Open Record.
Thank you.
That is Tim Grinke, La Crosse County District Attorney and Special Prosecutor in the Ridglan Farms case. When we come back, we're going to talk to the organization that started this whole investigation with their petition to the court. We'll do that right after this. We are back on Open Record, and we are joined now by Rebecca Robinson, president of Dane for Dogs. She's been on the podcast a few times, but welcome back to Open Record, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me.
So it was Dane for Dogs, and I know you worked with other organizations as well, but filed the original petition seeking a special prosecutor. I know we've talked about this before, but real quickly, for those who don't know, how did Dane for Dogs start, and how did you guys end up in a position to file something like this?
We started in 2018. So another organization called DXE, their activists went into Ridglan Farms in 2017 and then publicized their video footage and the dogs that they had rescued in 2018. So that's when we learned about it, and we, being the local Wisconsin residents, learned about Ridglan Farms. And so that's why I started Dane for Dogs in 2018. And then we've spent the last 7 years raising awareness, asking our public officials to do something, gathering information through FOIA requests, filing complaints. We've been working hard on it for 8 years now. And so that's how we kind of ended up in this situation where we were partnering with the activists who ended up going into the farm in 2017 when their charges were dropped. And so Wayne Shung came to us and asked if we wanted to participate, and then they brought along the Animal Activist Legal Defense Project, and we also brought in Alliance for Animals, who were key partners, all of them, in this.
Just off air in between the break, Tim Grinke, the special prosecutor, mentioned that he had been in somewhat regular contact with your organization, in part because he knew that Dane County, the Dane County District Attorney hadn't. And that was one of the things that you guys felt you had been sort of left out of the loop, and that's why you went this route. Can you talk a little bit about the communication you did have throughout this process and how that helped?
Yeah, DA Grinke was very transparent with us. He took every phone call that I made to him. He agreed to every meeting that we asked for. He listened to us. We felt like we had a really good relationship, and that he was, he didn't make all of the decisions that we wanted him to, but he explained his reasoning. He was patient, and he listened to our concerns, and we felt like he heard them, even if he didn't always act on them.
So ultimately, the outcome. How do you feel about this? Because on the one hand, you can see the end, light at the end of the tunnel for the end of this breeding operation. On the other hand, those dogs are still there, and right now there are plans for them to be sold into research.
That's right. But I think in the big picture, this is such an incredible victory. This is a business that has been around since the 1960s, and they have been breeding and selling dogs for that whole time, to the point that they are the second largest research puppy mill in the country. And so this has always been about the breeding and selling side of Ridglan Farms. When we talk about the research puppy mill, that's what we're talking about. And to have that finally, after all of these years, voluntarily shutting down, that's an incredible victory. And of course, we are still very concerned about the dogs that are inside of there, as we have been about the dogs that have been there for the last 60 years. Every time a truck leaves Ridglan Farms, those dogs are going somewhere where we don't want them to go. And so we're going to continue doing everything that we can to make sure that we are still trying to get those dogs out, still trying every avenue that we have to rescue those dogs.
What could those avenues be? I'm just curious what the options would be at this point.
Well, we're exploring them. We had a meeting last night where we had Beagle Freedom Project and Animal Wellness Action and Rise for Animals on a call. A lot of national organizations are weighing in and they're offering to help with either legal options or just brainstorming ideas, getting legislators involved. There's so many organizations that have a lot of experience that care about these dogs that want to help. And so we are leveraging all of them.
You mentioned that this is the second largest beagle breeding operation in the country. There's still a massive one out there, and that's Marshall.
Right.
I think they have something like 18,000 beagles. Is that right? I mean, it's a huge facility.
That's right. Yeah, it's somewhere around 22,000.
2020. You, even compared to the 3,000 or 4,000, which seems like a massive number at Ridglan Farms, is Marshall like sort of the next? Is that the next target? Is that the next place that groups like yours go, or are you? I mean, it sounds like you still have a lot of work to do just right here in Wisconsin.
If I were Marshall, I would be nervous right now. They've seen Invigo shut down, they're seeing Ridgeland Farms shut down, and they are the big target. I think if I were them, I would be very concerned.
Where is Marshall?
New York.
New York. Okay. So I know we had spoken about this community being very fractured, lots of different views on this outcome. Has that been difficult for you to navigate?
Everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants all of Ridgeland Farm shut down, the breeding side and the research side. Everyone wants all of the dogs saved. Everyone wants an end to dog experimentation altogether. So we are absolutely united in our end goal. And I think there are some organizations who have differing views about how we get there, about whether this is a complete win or whether this is a partial victory. So I think there's differing agreements or disagreements there, but overall, I don't think it's necessarily divisive in any way. I think it's just we all know we want the same thing. We're all working in good faith to make sure we get there as fast as we can.
I did think it was interesting that, I go back to the beginning of all this, and one of the first people I interviewed was Wayne Shung. He is the one who went in, one of the activists who went in with DXE back in 2017, published the videos. He talked openly about what they did, why they did it. He was willing to face the criminal charges. He wanted his day in court, and he's been obviously behind this movement all along. But toward the end, he became frustrated with the special prosecutor. He didn't sound particularly happy with this ultimate deal that was being made, and he wrote some things that angered the special prosecutor. Obviously, there's hardly anyone in this process who's been closer to this issue than Wayne Shung. But can you talk a little bit about sort of the way things went at the end? And I know the special prosecutor said to me that didn't help. But I also wonder if it didn't hurt, if it really hurt, because it was within a few days of his, of whatever he published, that there was a deal. I don't know what to make of that. Is that a coincidence or what? But what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't want to speak for Wayne. I think he and I have different opinions on this, but he's also an attorney and I'm not. So he has critiques of DA Grinke's kind of maybe legal options, what he should have done that way, that I simply can't speak to. So I would let him argue his own points. From my perspective, I think DA Grinke did quite a good job taking what should have been or what could have been federal charges or felony charges that ultimately just end in a fine for Ridgeland Farms, and actually getting them to voluntarily agree to shut down is a big step in the right direction, in my opinion.
I use the term a lot, animal activist groups or animal rights groups, and a lot of our viewers don't really consider themselves part of an animal rights group, but they still have opinions about this. And what I wonder is, in the big picture, we've talked about it here on the podcast. I know, Jenna, you've asked me, but there is still a need to develop drugs and treatments and other things. And we've talked about, is the technology there to do all those things without animals? I think that seems to be the big question that remains for a lot of people is, hey, I don't want to harm dogs. I don't want to harm any animals if we don't have to. But do we still have to? What do you say to that?
I think a lot of people may not identify as animal rights activists, but they actually support animal rights. Because what animal rights is saying is that these animals should have a voice. There are so many times when people say, well, why can't you just stop this? And it's because we don't have, in the legal term, we don't have standing because we are not the victims. But the dogs who are the victims don't have legal standing in a court of law either. And so a lot of people, when they say, they see these things going on and they think our laws should account for this, they are actually supporting animal rights and they just don't realize it. That's what animal rights is. It's asking, it's saying these animals have inherent standing and that they should, their perspective should be taken into account. And so I would encourage anyone who's thinking they're not an animal rights activist to ask if they feel this is wrong or that we should have been able to do more. Perhaps they actually do support animal rights.
Rebecca Robinson, president of Dane for Dogs. Thank you once again for being here on Open Record. I know you've said this is not the end of the story for you. This is still just the beginning, right?
Well, I don't know about the beginning. We've been going for a long time.
Maybe the
but
beginning,
This is a major milestone. We're very happy about it, but we are not done.
You have more work to do. At least that's what I've heard you say. Well, again, Rebecca, thank you for being here on the podcast.
Thank you.
We will go off the record right after this. And it is time for us to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual and have a little fun by answering a question that this one over here has.
I saw this today and it made me roll my eyes, mainly because I cannot say this in my house without my kids like saying it louder and doing the hand gesture.
6'7".
Is,
Yes.
I was going to say, is that what it is? We knew what we both
is.
knew what it
It
was.
is. Dictionary.com just crowned it.
No.
Yeah,
6'7"
I know.
as its 2025 word of the year.
It's not a word.
But what does it mean?
Nobody
it means
knows,
nothing.
But yeah, and if it's in a dictionary, doesn't the dictionary have to have the definition? And if
Well,
there's not a
they
meaning, then how
said
can they have a
it
definition?
is a nonsensical slang made popular by Gen Alpha. So I'm sure that's part of what's going to be in the definition, right? So it started as this meme,
Please
it
tell
snowballed
me
into
they
a
found a way.
Is that
cultural
how it started?
phenomenon.
A meme?
Yes, it
Tell
was like
me-
a video.
Tell me they found a way to put it on page 67.
I hope so.
I don't know.
I don't
That
know,
would be
maybe.
great.
But now it's an S, so it's probably like really deep. Maybe it's on page 670. But I'm not kidding, and I don't know how it's like in your house if your girls are into that or if people in your life. I can't even help my son do math anymore. Like he will, I'm like, oh, is that probably like is that a 6 or a 7? And I don't even mean to do it. And he goes 6, 7. He even made 6, 7 on his pumpkin this year. He carved a 6
see,
and
this
a
is
7.
This is a tough time to be a teacher, I think.
It is.
right? This has
The
gotta
amount of
be
times
hard.
you're just going to accidentally say 6 or 7.
That's
and the
what I'm
whole
saying.
class.
I know. Well, even Quinn's middle school math teacher, this was like during the parent night when
Yeah.
school first started, and he was like, it's a dark time to be a math teacher. He's like, there's going to
any
be a little
teacher.
like check mark in this, generation's timeline.
Yeah,
so
I think if I get any like opportunities to go speak to kids in school, I'm just going to start out by saying, how tall do you think I am? I'm saying, I'm 5'7", but if I was a foot taller,
they do
it's
this.
cheap. It's cheap, but I
But,
can get
like,
them engaged.
Okay, so as annoyed as I am by it, there's something
Charming about it.
There's like,
It's so dumb. It's
it
fun.
is so dumb, but like
I
everybody
like that
knows
it's
it.
harmless. I like that it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah. It
something
doesn't
like
hurt
And
anybody's
it
feelings.
doesn't,
Right,
no, and it
right.
doesn't mean anything really, because that's the first question is, what does that even mean? I don't know. But everyone does it, so it makes me relate to my kids.
Can I ask though, are we naive? Do the kids all like it has a meaning? They're like, tell the adults it doesn't
no,
mean
I
anything.
don't think it has a meaning.
I don't
Okay.
think so.
Because my daughter will say, you're 7, and everybody goes 6, 7. So
Yeah.
if you're watching at home and you haven't heard this yet, that's
You have
all
to
it
say
is.
it like
That's all
You
it
say
is.
the number, and everybody goes 6, 7.
Yeah, you got to say it like that. You can't just be like 6, 7. It's 6,
6,
7.
7. And do you have
gotta
to do that thing? Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I don't know. It's just something. But the problem is now that all of us older people
No,
are saying it, it's not cool anymore. So like, and that happens in my house a lot.
But somehow it's got to hang around until June, right? Because
Oh,
it's going to be
you go to
6,
the
7, and it's
6,
going to be
7, June to July.
That's how I'll remember my anniversary now, because it's 6, 8, and I'll just know the day before. When everybody
no.
starts saying 6, 7, I'll be like, I gotta get to the store for a card and flowers.
But it is interesting, like how some of these hang on.
Oh my
because my
gosh,
kids
yes.
sometimes will sing like little hand games,
Yep.
and it's the same wording that I
Yes.
used as a kid. Like
Yep.
it hasn't changed in all that time. So
Right.
you never know what might stick around.
Are these the little
Like the
patty
Miss
cake type
Mary
things?
Mac-
Yeah,
Mac-
Miss Mary Mac.
Yeah, like they still know
Yeah.
all of that.
And do they look at you like I'll start to sing with them, and they're like,
How do you
How
know
do you
this?
know that? Like they are just appalled.
Right. Or like the things like the back rubs or like the
Oh,
I
yes.
don't even know. Like there's patting on the back.
Yeah.
I don't
all
know
those
that.
things are still
I
there.
just know that we still sing "Ring Around the Rosie" to little children, even though if you think about it, it goes.
It's
like
real
about
dark.
the plague, right?
No,
It's
yeah, it
something,
is.
yeah.
It's dark,
So
yeah.
it's pretty awful, but yet we still do it because it's so sweet. Ring around. Anyway. I wanted to find a way to wrap this up
With
something that led
yeah.
to 6, 7, and I don't really have it. This isn't episode 6, 7. This is like episode what, 390?
390 it is.
390. 10 more. We're gonna hit 400. Oh, what are we gonna do for the 400th episode.
I have a little song and
That
dance
will be
prepared.
something else. I'm excited to hear about that. All right, we will wrap things up when we come right back. If you have a topic you would like us to discuss on Open Record or an issue you think we should investigate for Fox 6 News, send us an email to fox6investigators@fox.com. That is Fox 6, not
6-7.
And as always, thank you to the people who make this podcast possible. Obviously, Sarah, Jenna, Tim behind the screen there, and our editor, Dave Machuda. With that, I'm Brian Polson. We'll be back next week.